This is just formality now. I'm David Sencer. I'm interviewing Dawn Eidelman on the 3rd of April 2008 at CDC. Dawn knows that she is being taped and has signed permission. How old were you when you went to Africa?
When we went to Africa, I was 5 years old, so I started my formal schooling in Lomé, Togo, at l'École de la Marina, not speaking a word of French, on day one. And it was a rather traumatic first day of school. I, about halfway through the day, had to use the facilities but didn't know how to ask. They figured out what I needed, but then when they showed me the facilities, I had no idea how to use the drain in the ground. So luckily, we had a long school day and a long lunch, and I went home for lunch, and my ingenious mother noticed that I had an outfit that was almost identical, persuaded me that nobody would know the difference. I went back for the afternoon, and she clued me in how to use the little drain in the ground. And astonishingly, within a month, I was starting to understand the French. The only white kid in the class, pigtails, we had the little inkwells in the desk. And by the end of kindergarten, my father was, I think, a little bit jealous that my French was pretty solid and quite effortlessly. So in my line of work now, I'm a huge advocate of total immersion for English acquisition. I don't believe in segregating students for bilingual education because I know that children are really like sponges.
How long were you in school in Togo?
In Togo, I was there through middle of 3rd grade. So kindergarten, 1st and 2nd at l'École de la Marina, French system, but African private school. 3rd grade was an interesting experience. The first half of the year, we were still in Lomé, and the first house that we had lived in, the bottom floor, the bottom floor had become Boutique Togo Agogo, and the top floor was our schoolhouse for the American kids. And we used Calvert, which is still in existence now, for distance learning. And 1 or 2 of the moms who had teaching experience facilitated. And we had assembly in the living room, and the 2 bedrooms were, I think, the odd grades and the even grades. So we did distance learning in an American program. And that's when I first started formal studies of English.
In addition to learning about how to use the toilet, what are some of your other interesting experiences in your formative years?
So many. As I shared on the way over here, I really did not like the Sunday ritual of having to take Aralin. It was really nasty and bitter, and I just couldn't abide it. So I didn't take it on a couple of occasions, and I became quite ill with malaria. And I remember that fever, and sitting in the tub, taking baths, trying to get that fever to break. That one is definitely a distinct memory. It was actually an idyllic childhood. We didn't have TV. I had a record player and a few records, and I know those lyrics to this day, backward, forward, inside out. Just a couple of toys. And what that really did was promote a comfort level with time in solitude, time for reflection, time to develop an expansive imagination. And I regret that more children don't have that experience in childhood now, because I think it's very important for really becoming who you're capable of becoming, having some quiet time and not being programmed all the time with activities. And we had a lot of really cool pets. A family of bush babies. We had a parrot, feisty Senegalese parrot, Bud, who came back to the States with my mom and lived another 20 years or so in captivity and remained feisty all the way. We also had a podo, and that was quite the dramatic story, and a small python. We kept mice in a cage. Every Sunday after Waffles and Erlen, we would, in the afternoon, watch the python devour a mouse. That's what we did for kicks. Some men came to paint our ceiling fans, let the mice out of the cage. One of the mice bit the podo, and the podo was probably our closest family pet. She would pluck out my dad's chest hairs when he was taking a nap. She got into my mom's birth control pills. Very, very intimate family member. So it was really tragic when she got rabies, and she also bit my mother. So the whole family went through the rabies series, and I remember Dr. Hen would clean out the syringes and obviously get rid of the needles and everything and make them suitable for water fights. So my brother Dave and I would have water fights. But Christmas that year we had a rabies shot because we were going through the series at that point. So memories of pets and lazy days, a lot of reading, listening to music, very few toys, but the ones we had we really cherished. Halloween was fun. We would, they thought that we were absolutely nuts. My mom was a really fun hostess, and I remember one year put sheets over the clothesline to make a tunnel of terror. And we dressed up in all kinds of different costumes that our tailor made for us and wondered what the crazy Americans were up to. I remember some rollicking fun. There were some great adult parties, and they never seemed to mind that we were kind of milling around.
I remember visiting your house. It was probably in 68. And George Lithgett and Don Millar and I, and it's when we were making our big tour of Africa. It was a very pleasant evening, I remember. What was your feeling about life of other people in Africa?
Of the Africans or the other American?
Africans.
Interesting again from a child's perspective. I did have an awareness of being very privileged. And I remember one day standing out on the balcony with my doll and looking across the street at an African girl who was about the same age, who was also holding up her doll, and just noting the disparity in the quality of the houses that we were living in, and feeling that somehow that wasn't fair. But I loved the experience of going to L'École de la Marina, and I think that too has had a profound impact on my worldview as an adult. A lot of what I do professionally is most of our charter schools that we start up and manage are in the inner city. And Inc. magazine has something called Inner City 100, the fastest growing companies that serve, that revitalize, generate jobs for, really enhance inner city populations in the U.S. And our company for 3 years in a row is in the top 5. So the need is really great in neighborhoods where children live in poverty. And so much of what I feel really deeply about is not prejudging what children are capable of accomplishing, and really holding a high standard and a high expectation for everyone, and rising to the occasion as adults to serve that need. And a lot of it, I think, goes back to how I felt on that first day of school, looking around me at all these kids, African kids, who understood everything that was going on in French. I didn't understand a word. It was a hugely humbling experience. And I think that childhood experience and being a minority, I recall that it was just a very happy culture. It was a wonderful time in life. And I think that has had an impact on the way I see these children in the U.S. living in poverty, and not all of them. We serve children in affluent neighborhoods too. But I think that even as a child, I was keenly aware, coming back to the States in '72, how marginalized African Americans were in this country, and just being astonished by that, because I'd really idealized the States living overseas, and it was a surprise.
Were you stationed in any of the other countries in Africa?
We were in Nigeria for a year. We lived in Kaduna, in the Hogan's house after they moved out. It was a huge cavernous house, great for telling ghost stories. There were parts of the house we never even went into. And that was during a civil war, so we stayed very close to home. There we ended up going to a Catholic school, Sacred Heart. And that's when I had my encounter with British education, and it really, for years, I had some issues with my spelling as a result. But Nigeria was a positive experience for my brother and me as children, but unfortunately that was the time that my parents' marriage was starting to come apart. So that was, for them, I don't think nearly as positive as Togo had been.
You were in a Muslim culture in Kaduna. Mm-hmm. Did that impinge upon you in any way?
Not really that I can recall. I don't really, maybe it had to do with the fact that we were going to a Catholic school, but I think I was a little oblivious to that because it was never much of an issue with my parents, and so I don't think that really registered.
I would think that the environment in Togo was a much happier environment than...
It really was. It was just such a positive place. And really all the other expats there that we met, I loved the Peace Corps volunteers for years as a kid, that I aspired to serving in the Peace Corps. And it was a great culture. Wonderful gatherings, great music. The music, too, that my parents had on the reel-to-reel tapes that we played over and over again. The top 100 hits of 1966, Bob Dylan, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Beach Boys. But they made for some really wonderful gatherings.
You spent some time in Bangladesh with your father?
We did. My brother and I spent about half of the summer. The year must have been '75. And we went to Bangladesh first and stayed in their home. And he was wrapping up some work. And then we went together to Nepal and stayed in Dave Newberry's house in Kathmandu. And we went to India, and we were in New Delhi almost the whole time we were there. We did a couple of side trips. I think my brother and I went to see the Taj Mahal one day. And we spent a week on a houseboat in Kashmir as well. And that was an interesting experience because the only meat that one could eat there was lamb. So we either ate lamb or things cooked in lamb's grease. That left an impression too. French toast in lamb's grease.
Do you still like lamb?
I really don't, not so much. Not if it's gamey.
And I think to me, that's one of the problems with lamb today. It's not gamey enough. You hardly know you're eating it. Were you in Bangladesh long enough to have any feeling for the country?
I remember the crushing poverty of the country and seeing a body on the street, and I couldn't discern if the person was sleeping or dead. I was just really aware of the poverty. And it was also so incredibly muggy. That also left quite the impression. Almost hard to breathe there and in India. And, you know, this was in the back half of summer, so it was incredibly hot and humid. No, I remember Bangladesh as being, well, and I was a little older too. I was 14 when we visited Dad that summer. So I was very aware of children living in poverty and begging and, you know, missing limbs, and it was very hard, especially coming from living in the States for a few years then, living a very comfortable middle-class lifestyle, and then experiencing the poverty was, it was a lot more shocking at that point.
Is there anything else about your experiences that you'd like to get on the record?
Yeah, I think what's really most remarkable to me about those years, besides the fact that it was truly an idyllic childhood and a time to be able to enjoy family, friends, gathering, time for reflection, time to really to read, to sing, to get to know a few texts really, really well, because there weren't a lot of other distractions. I'm very proud of having been a part of smallpox eradication as a child, experiencing that, because it was such an amazing endeavor. And I remember upstairs in the bar in our house in Lomé, Dad kept scabs in the freezer, other things that we just never went into that refrigerator. It was also a bar. We weren't supposed to be there. But I remember even at the time being very proud of the work that my dad was doing and really liking the people he was working with, and finding it really interesting to hear the stories of when he was breaking bread with the chief of a village and trying to negotiate access to the veiled women so that he could vaccinate them. I loved the time that I got to spend with both of my parents with that lifestyle. Dad and I used to play chess all the time, and that was a lot of fun. And we spoke French together, and that was enjoyable. And from my perspective today, I'm really proud to have been a part of something so historic and huge. And I loved during the reunion a couple years ago the reflections about how the young doctors and what were they called? Operations officers really, in many ways, didn't know what they didn't know. That's something as an entrepreneur that I can really appreciate. And it's something that I think is what's truly remarkable about this global endeavor that was really unprecedented at the time. Sometimes not knowing what you don't know, not knowing the magnitude of the project that you're taking on is a blessing. And thank goodness we had courageous, bold, ambitious, tenacious, brilliant, dedicated people who, with all those qualities, didn't know what they didn't know, and they kept they kept at it, and they chased this disease from the face of the earth.
And most of them were very kind people.
Absolutely. Absolutely so. It was a great community to be part of. And I remember that vividly, even as a child. These were, several of these folks I called uncle for years to come. And even at the time, I knew that it was special, and we were part of something that we could be proud of.
Thank you.